skinned alive, flown into the sun, sliced apart by a samurai sword, killed and revived only to be killed again. Just some of the many grim endings of your favorite Cartoon Network villains. Today, we're ranking Cartoon Network villain fates, from God Off Easy to Gruesome to worse than death. So let's get started with the villains who really got off easy. And who better to start with than Miss Endive, the villain of one of Cartoon Network's most easygoing shows. Chowder is a pretty low-stakes show, but it still has its conflicts. One such conflict is Endive, Mungdal's business rival and possible ex-lover, characterized by envy, cruelty, and sheer thirst.
Something smells like
Endive.
Seriously, on top of using Panini, a clearly not quite right in the head child, as a pawn in her schemes and constantly harassing Mung, she objectifies Schnitzel constantly throughout the series, in ways that make her apprentice look absolutely tame in comparison. How does the show punish her for this? Well, she marries him. Yeah, I'm not joking. The main antagonist of the series got a happy, presumably consensual marriage with the object of her romantic harassment. They both seem genuinely happy, so that is nice, I guess. But it's kind of wild that this kids show saw a character who stalked, creeped on, and flat out threatened to cannibalize another out of twisted love, and decided, hey, they'd make a cute couple.
Yes, Sergeant. I'm quite certain I recognize a few of them.
But next up is the queen of dodging accountability, Pink Diamond, who you might later know as Rose Quartz. Yeah, it turns out that Steven's dearly departed, beloved mom was basically a second chance at life for an infamous war criminal. Well, maybe infamous isn't the right word. Yes, Pink Diamond got a lot of people killed in her recklessness, but she always had good intentions, starting the Gem War in an effort to protect her home. The reason we have to rank her here, though, is simply the fact that she doesn't really end up facing the consequences of her actions in the end, instead faking her death with Pearl's help and starting anew as Rose Quartz.
Down here.
Ultimately living on in Steven. She got a sincere second chance at making a peaceful life for herself and her family, and didn't really have a way of knowing that Diamond's drama would affect Steven even thousands of years later. That said, with how long she lived, she had to deal with plenty of guilt that must have weighed on her. And while you could argue that's a form of literal cosmic justice, she still certainly dodged a bullet. But those are the characters who qualify as having easy fates to stomach. Now let's move on to the non-lethal punishments, for the villains whose fates were bearable but still life-changing in some negative ways. Okay, now I know this next guy doesn't really fit with most of the video's characters, but we just have to give a shout out to Grim. While he's a more pleasant incarnation of the Grim Reaper, Grim is still very much the embodiment of death itself, who just happens to be in servitude to some unstable children at the time being.
I am the Grim Reaper, master of the forces of life and death.
not anymore.
And yeah, that's exactly why we insist on giving him a spot. I mean, the whole premise of the show is him losing a game of limbo and being forced to be the personal bestie and manservant of two children as a result. To make matters worse, these aren't your average everyday kids. Billy is sweet and friendly enough, sure, but he's also slower than a snail full of Benadryl.
Zooks, this movie's too scary.
Oh, please. I've seen scarier stuff in your toilet.
Yeah.
And Mandy is, well, she's Mandy. I think any knowledge of the show should make that a complete statement on its own.
Punishment is its own reward.
Falling from being a supernatural personification of death itself to being a glorified babysitter has to be a very tough pill to swallow. And Grimm makes that known. He is not happy about being held hostage by kids, to the point where he even fantasizes about killing them a few times in the earlier seasons.
Hey, thanks for slicing the pie, Grim.
The only reason why we can't rank him any higher is that while Grimm isn't exactly happy with his fate, he does grow accustomed to it after a while. Heck, he straight up had a chance to escape from it in the episode Fiend is Like Friend without the R, when Nurgle kidnapped Billy and Mandy to be his friends instead. Grimm initially went along with it, but when he saw Billy's crayon drawings of himself and Grimm, he decided to not save them from Nurgle and keep performing his duties. His life isn't the same, but apparently he'd rather rather be with them than without them, which certainly makes this one of the lighter punishments on our list. Only on Cartoon Network could a teenage girl be less pleasant than the literal embodiment of death, but Heather was just that kind of person. To be honest, she had arguably the least gruesome demise of the villains in Total Drama, but still, this is Total Drama, so that isn't exactly saying much. She did have to deal with all the humiliation of being shaved bald on national TV, quite sloppily I might add, and becoming infamous for being the mean girl of Total Drama. You might argue that isn't much of anything, since she didn't even suffer major injuries like most of the cast, but, well, think about it. Heather went through hell this season. Every camper did, sure, but winning all those challenges meant Heather had to work harder than almost anyone else while simultaneously burning bridges with the entire cast.
You are nothing without me!
I'm not saying she didn't absolutely earn her comeuppance, but it still must have been a major pain to go through all that and still lose on a technicality.
Wait! Do I get my money or what?
He may have had only one major appearance, but we have to give Mr. Ross a mention as well. This dude, man, I know the volleyball game meant a lot to you, dude, but being so angry about having it ruined that you literally defy the laws of time and space itself to get revenge and fix things?
This is a project I'm working on.
Cool.
That's a level of petty I didn't even know existed, and honestly, I'm kind of impressed by it.
Go back and win the volleyball state championship, duh. And then get revenge.
His fate could have easily been pretty horrific, but thanks to Rigby's past self actually apologizing for his misdeeds for once, Ross cried tears of joy and even offered his friendship to the guys, which he'd sadly have to wait a while to follow up on, as he'd be going to jail for plutonium smuggling and destruction of property. But hey, at least he's not an insane time-traveling murderer. That's pretty good. I hope he gets to have those burgers with the guys later. Burgers and a lot of therapy. Next is the main antagonist of Camp Lazlo, Scoutmaster Lumpus. Lumpus seemed like a pretty cut-and-dry character for most of the series. In simple terms, he was a jerk who liked to make kids' lives miserable, at least for about 2 months at summer camp. But in the series finale, things got a lot more complicated. See, Heifer Wolf from Rocco's Modern Life showed up with the police to confront Lumpus. In a meta sense, this was probably just a joke about him and Lumpus sharing the same voice actor. But in universe, it turned out that Lumpus was an imposter the whole time, having locked the real Lumpus, aka Heifer, in the closet all summer to steal his job. And wow, this show has been over for years, but I still can't believe this is the actual description of what happened rather than a Robot Chicken parody or something. In any case, Lumpus was committed to a mental asylum as a result, which is probably the safest place for him. Sure, he's not exactly going to have much autonomy going forward, but at least he won't have to fear Commander Hoo-Ha's next inspection. Moving on to Rob. Rob was the designated bad guy of Elmore, which is ironic since he's probably not even in the top 5 worst people there. He proved this in the last episode of the original series, where he disguised himself as Superintendent Evil to turn all of Elmore High's students into more normal versions of themselves to avoid, something. I don't know. Something to do with the world falling apart into pixels and being sucked into a white void, which good old Robbie himself got sucked into. Since we have no clue what this transformation was intended to avoid, and anyhow, we can't really definitively place him any higher or lower. All we know is that he had some genuine cause for concern and is probably going to end up seriously injured as a result. Now, he's a character on today's list without a definitive fate, but we just had to mention one of Cartoon Network's most iconic supervillains, Mojo Jojo. Throughout the entire series, this super intelligent monkey spends all his time plotting revenge on his adversaries, who happen to be 3 kindergarten girls.
Your kitty cooking days are over, Mojo Jojo!
Of course, being your typical recurring cartoon villain, Mojo Jojo doesn't really have some finite end to his character arc, but he does surprisingly have a backstory. Originally being the professor's troublemaking pet, he grew jealous when his owners spent more time on the girls than him, so in an attempt to sabotage them, he ended up ironically making them.
Powerpuff Girls being born!
Which can't be an easy fact to accept. Tack on the fact that he gets the crap beaten out of him by children in pretty much all of his appearances, and you have a level of humiliation that's more than worth a mention on this list. But let's talk about the main villain of Total Drama's second generation cast, Scott. Like Heather, Scott is a villain whose cruelty absolutely dug his own grave. The difference between them is that while Heather just had to deal with some classic public humiliation, Scott had to deal with getting utterly brutalized by a two-legged, air-breathing shark who was chasing him for the entire season. Now, usually when a cartoon character gets heavily injured like this, they have some wacky full-body cast or wheelchair or something, and then it's back to normal at the end of the episode. But when said cartoon character is a human teenager who is placed in an iron lung with only his head exposed, I mean, Jesus, that is disturbing. Made worse by the fact that we don't get confirmation that he recovered until the next season. The only reason he isn't much higher is the fact that he made a quicker recovery than even Alejandro, who was burned by lava, mind you. But cartoon regenerative abilities aside, this is still one of the most over-the-top injuries in a series chock full of them. Also, if you choose to believe it, his last appearance was in the finale of All-Stars, where you'd assume he flew into the sun if the creators hadn't confirmed his survival. So, just a shower thought. But now it's time to get into the really brutal stuff. These are the characters who are no longer alive nor kicking, as they suffered the lethal fates. And first up, let's talk about Courage's nemesis, specifically in one of the last episodes of the show, Ball of Revenge. In this episode, Eustace decides that after everything he's been through, seeing Muriel knit her beloved pet doggy a blanket is his breaking point. As a result, he summons 6 of Courage's past enemies to try and get rid of him for good. And I mean, good God, dude. The worst part of this is that despite Eustace being the ringleader of the scheme, he gets the least brutal punishment.
Stupid dog!
Courage is able to scream his way out of the mess so loudly that it destroys the floor beneath his opponents, and given how Eustace dies in the show, I'm guessing such a fall into the abyss would have taken these guys out. Either way, we don't exactly see them after this point, so they're as good as done any way you slice it. And speaking of Courage, we restrained ourselves against using a lot of characters who don't suffer much more than typical cartoon shenanigans, but we made an exception for Eustace back. Kenny McCormick may be the one best known for it, but Eustace brought the simple art of repeatedly dying as a running joke to children everywhere. Seriously, Eustace was constantly going through it. Whether he was getting crushed, run over, disintegrated, paralyzed, eaten by a squirrel that didn't even have anything to do with the rest of the episode, you name it, Eustace has probably suffered it. Now, just for the sheer range and quantity of deaths, we would place him at the top of our list, but the thing about Eustace is that both he and his own family usually seem pretty unbothered about his demise. It's almost like they straight up know he's gonna come back the next day.
What did I do?
Or maybe, given how mean he is all the time, they don't have a ton of reason to feel bad for him.
The only thing uglier than this is this.
Either way, it makes it hard to see his death as a serious problem, as messed up as that sounds. But let's talk about Anti-Pops. Man, we were all so busy rightfully mourning the death of Pops that we forgot the fact that the big bad of the last season got the exact same ending. He was flown into the sun in his brother's arms to ensure he'd never hurt anyone again. And while this was a necessary ending, this act of tough love and sacrifice was enough to give Anti-Pops a sense of sorrow and remorse in his final moments. He seemed at peace in the end, able to accept one last hug from his long-lost brother and to accept an instantaneous death. It's wild when getting thrown into the sun is one of the more bearable deaths on the list.
Bad show. Bad show indeed.
Now, we have to talk about the terrifying Lich. For the first few seasons of Adventure Time, this guy seemed to be the big bad, and rightfully so. Just look at him. He went from getting kicked in the face by Billy in a goofy song to wearing the man's dead skin as a disguise. Quite the upgrade, if you ask us. And so was his final fate, as a matter of fact. See, in the episode Escape from the Citadel, the Lich gets splashed by some healing guardian blood that restores his flesh and muscle, turning him into a gigantic baby. I mean, judging by his screaming during the process, it probably wasn't the most physically pleasant thing, but I mean, he's got all his needs taken care of by Mr. Pig and Tree Trunks now, right? Sure, he's kind of got the whole prisoner in his own mind thing going on, since the Lich still comes out at times, but on the whole, this doesn't seem like a horrible fate.
like him a lot.
Now, if we were talking about Fiona and Cake here, well, let's leave that for another time maybe. One of the longest awaited villain defeats on our list is that of Aku. And honestly, it was really worth the wait. This guy was tormenting Jack no matter what timeline he was in, so when Jack finally had him on death's door, he didn't hesitate to make the killing blow and then some. There's nothing like seeing a villain who was a gigantic threat throughout their series reduced to a miniature, crushable version of themselves, and getting straight up sliced through the skull as a form of sheer catharsis.
It is done.
Aku finally got what he deserved here, if only Ashi didn't have to suffer for it. Vilgax is a villain truly deserving the title of supervillain. Considered by even Ben as one of the most dangerous foes he's faced by a long shot, Vilgax is one of those villains who just keeps coming back. It doesn't matter if you blow this guy up, send him out into space where he's turned into a petrified rock slowly bleeding out, he is somehow still alive after it, even if it's in the distant future.
We've been trying to get this for years, Vilgax. Each time, epic fail.
Dodging death when you're as large scale of a villain as Vilgax is a pretty impressive feat, especially doing it so many times.
I have come too far to be denied.
But the amount of physical pain he's undeniably been through as a result is not up for debate, so he's definitely had a rough ride. But let's talk about the Teen Titans' arch-nemesis, Slade. You would think being burned by lava would be enough to take someone out for good, but not on Cartoon Network. And that's not just a Total Drama World Tour finale thing either. In Teen Titans' second season finale, Slade was seemingly defeated at the hands of a betrayal by his mistreated protege, Terra, who pushed him into a massive pit of lava. This lava burnt him enough to lose all of his skin and blood, which would have not only been extremely painful, but resulted in a fairly instantaneous death.
But I got lucky. Someone was looking out for me that day.
That is, if Trigun hadn't kept him alive just long enough to use his ruthlessness as a chance to recruit him as a superpowered errand boy in exchange for getting his skin and blood back.
Hey Jeff, good news! You're getting your skin back!
Unfortunately, Trigun, being an interdimensional demon, feared for his power and mercilessness, didn't exactly prove to be the most devoted guy to his word. On top of finding a loophole around restoring Slade to his former self, he stripped him of his newly bestowed powers and seemingly ripped him apart, making him suffer his second death. Sure, Slade absolutely deserved this, but there's just something almost pitiful about everyone he works with double-crossing him in the end. Almost. However you interpret it, he was killed brutally by someone he trusted twice, and that is just an awful way to go. But we can think of just 3 more Cartoon Network villains who had an even worse hand dealt to them in the end. These are the fates worse than death. The Bronze Medal of Brutality goes to the overarching antagonist of Adventure Time, Gulp. He might very well be the most powerful villain on our list, essentially the very embodiment of pure corruption and chaos. When Simon, Betty, and Finn are all trapped inside him in the series finale, the trio try their hardest to wish him out of existence so he won't cause any more harm. A wish that can't be granted, leading to Betty wishing for the next best thing, the power to keep Simon safe.
I wish for the power to keep Simon safe.
With that, he's fused together with Golb and flies out of Ooh, keeping Golb from ever hurting anyone like Simon again. Now, did Golb deserve this? Absolutely. But imagine being a prisoner in your own mind, on top of being immortal, and having no autonomy over your own body. That easily counts as a fate worse than death itself, for a being whose whole purpose is to reap chaos and destruction all over the universe. Still, at least Golb is presumably not in any physical pain, right? We're really splitting hairs here, but that's gotta be a pretty big perk at this point on the list. The Silver Medal of Brutality has to go to Mandark from Dexter's Lab. Despite the show having less continuity than many, there's one special that actually gives us a glimpse into the future. The TV movie Ego Trip, which sees Mandark get his hands on one of Dexter's most revolutionary inventions, the Neurosonic Protocore. With it, he grows even more corrupt than usual and transforms the world into a brain-dead mess.
Oh my gosh, we left the core out in my cubicle.
Where only he himself is allowed access to science and knowledge. In the end, that evil brain would be all there was left of Mandark. Well, that and a coat rack. Seriously, after his defeat at the hands of the iconic team of Dexter, and Billy, Mandark's biggest counterpart literally explodes from sheer rage, only leaving behind his own brain, which apparently Dexter decided to keep alive on display for the world to see as a punishment for his crimes. Mandark absolutely deserved this, sure, but we still can't deny the brutality of it. Imagine having enough consciousness to think and speak about getting revenge on your worst enemy, but being able to do absolutely nothing about it. Not to mention being forced to live in his lab until the end of your days. The only thing positive we can say is the fact that since Dee Dee unknowingly saved the future by pressing that shiny green button, society was able to flourish without the obstacle of Mandark's horrific regime. As a result, it's possible he could have gotten a less brutal fate this time. But now it's time to talk about the gold medal of brutality. Boogeyman from Billy and Mandy. This is one of those shows like Invader Zim where messed up stuff happens so often and at such a rapid pace that eventually you just kind of stop questioning it.
I don't know what you're talking about, but I feel great.
But as the main antagonist of Billy and Mandy's big boogie adventure, Boogie's defeat stood out even by this show's standards. As Grimm's bully and rival, Boogie is a wannabe master of fear itself. Wannabe, that is, because he isn't actually scary at all. But fret not, Boogie. All you've got to do is find the left hand of horror, a plot device. Ancient relic that will grant you the power to make anyone's worst fears come into reality. That is, as long as you can face your own. Ironically, but deservedly I might add, Boogie getting the hand doesn't result in him becoming scary, but rather, without even having the hand turned on, he finally comes to realize that he isn't scary at all. Which results in one of the most over-the-top bits of slapstick we've ever seen in a cartoon. And it goes on for like a minute. Boogie falls off a cliff, gets his skin eaten off piece by a bunch of bats, gets impaled on stalagmites, gets hit by a freaking monorail. This guy goes through several bouts of extreme physical pain that would have killed anyone who isn't immortal, and took enough hits to the head to become afraid of everything surrounding him, which led to even more slapstick violence. He's fearful enough to be emotionally and mentally tormented, jumpy enough to be physically tormented, and worst of all, he's immortal enough to never get a break from it. He may have been evil, but I've got to agree with Irwin on this one. Poor Boogeyman.